Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Supply Chain Digital Show right here on LinkedIn. My name is Scott Birch, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Supply Chain Editor in Chief Sean Ashcroft, Procurement Magazine Editor Georgia Wilson, and contributing editor to both titles, Helen Adams. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Now, do you know what? If we were playing kids' favorite Guess Who here, and someone said, "Do they wear glasses?" That's not going to be very helpful, is it? But hello, everyone. Glasses are not compulsory for this show, but let's see, because we do have a guest on later. Let's see if they're wearing glasses as well. Now, we join you every other Thursday here on LinkedIn around about the same time, which is 2 p.m. UK. And this is where we bring you news, insight, and talking points, lots of discussion, especially today, from the fast evolving, headline grabbing world of supply chain. Let's face it, you can't move in the news, wherever you are, on TV, radio, newspapers, without supply chain hogging the headlines right now. But even though there are four of us on this show is not all about us. We want you, our valued readers and followers. We want you to have your say. So on your screen, you should see a supply chain digital poll in the comments section. And this is about the most disruptive techs in supply chain. So this poll has been running on LinkedIn, and you still have a chance to vote, I believe, and we'll be having the results of that later in the show. But Helen, why don't you talk us through some of the options that we've given people here?
Sure. So the poll is, which techs do you feel are the most disruptive in supply chain? And the options are AI, Internet of Things, 3D printing, and drones. So what do you think?
Okay, well, it doesn't matter what I think. We want to know what everyone else thinks. I think, Sean, I think you maybe came up with this question. What are you expecting to see here? What do you think the supply chain audience are going to vote for?
I think it will be the core industry for techs, I imagine, AI, IoT. I'm going to be chatting about 3D printing a little bit later on, actually. So that is coming up on the rails.
Okay, and Georgia, not forgetting you. This is Georgia's first time on the show today, so a very warm welcome to Georgia. Georgia, I assume you've had a vote in this poll already. Do you want to tell us who you voted for, or is that a secret?
No, it's not a secret. Yeah, I think probably similar to what Sean said, AI, IoT, I think they're going to be top ones.
Okay.
I think drones.
You think drones? Okay, well, who knows? We'll have to wait and see the results of the poll, which we'll be having towards the end of the show. And also later in the show, we're delighted to have with us today Sheldon Mydat. He's the CEO of Sopico, an AI-driven collaborative platform for customer supplier ecosystems. Sheldon will be telling us a bit more about how Sopico can help deliver resilience and excellence across the supply chain. And that's coming up in the second half, as I said. But first, let's have a look at some of the latest news. And Sean, I think we're going to turn to you first. So why don't you select one of the top stories that you've seen in the last day or so?
Yes, Scott. A couple of things caught my eye over the last week or two. The first of which is about how old school computing still has a lot to teach modern day industry 4 technologies. Now, this piece arose out of a chat I had with Andy Hancock, who's vice president of the SAP Supply Chain Center of Excellence. Now, the Center of Excellence is basically like an SAP SWAT team of experts that go in and make sure that, you know, every stakeholder knows as much about products as early as possible. Now, Andy is an old school computer fanatic from the 80s. And he was telling me that, you know, although everything has changed in computing since that time, in some ways, nothing has changed. And he says it's still all about the flow of data. You know, where was the data created? Where is it stored? Who needs to use it? what's it for, those kind of things. And he also says, if you remember back to like the early noughties, late 90s, with modem dial-up, I'm sure we can all remember those dreaded modem tones. I'm sure you can, Scott. Anyway, I'm not,
I do. I can.
But what Andy was saying was that back in the day of modem, you couldn't throw much data at the pipes because the pipes were so thin, they just couldn't take it, and everything would hang and stop. But now, most of the Industry 4 tech, IoT, AI, all of that, is underpinned by 5G technology. And those pipes are so fat that you can virtually throw anything down them. But he said that actually this is becoming a bit of a problem because computer programmers now, because they can throw data down them at will, they are. And this is causing, bloat and inefficiency. He said, particularly with Internet of Technology, said because you could have a component in a machine in Singapore that's one of 10,000 components in a supply chain, and that can be throwing data at you every other minute, letting you know that it's not overheating. He says, actually, all you need to know is that it is overheating. So you only need to know the exceptions. So his take was, modern day computer programmers really should fall back on the disciplines of yesteryear if you want a lean, mean sort of Internet 4 world.
Okay, I mean that sounds really interesting. I haven't actually read that story yet, but I'm certainly going to, as an old school computer fanatic from the 80s myself. But Sean, I liked the fact that you said that I could remember probably modem dial-up, because I think I could see a blank face on Georgia Wilson there. I don't think she knows what dial-up means. Helen thankfully says she does. Just out of interest, while we're talking here, what was your first computer, Sean, that you had? It's a good way of gauging how old somebody is.
My first computer was a Mac 2.
Fancy. Okay. Helen?
We had this huge family computer that was a Dell. And I can remember the dial-up tone and having to ask my parents if they would mind not using the phone for half an hour while I used the internet.
Okay. And Georgia, your first computer?
Yeah, similar to Helen, it was like we just had a desktop computer in the spare room, but I don't quite remember having to plug it into the phone, but we still did have an Ethernet cable to plug in, so I'm just about old enough for that.
Okay, all right, there you go, a snapshot of computing down the ages. My first computer, seeing as no one's asking me, we had the ZX81 with its whole 1K of memory. I know, 1K. And then we upgraded to the classic ZX Spectrum as well, with its rubberized keyboard, its colors, and 16K. Imagine the gameplay on that device. Anyway, we are wallowing in 80s nostalgia here. Let's go on to your next story, Sean, which, as you alluded to earlier, is about 3D printing.
Yes, I mean, this sort of feeds into the poll, really. 3D printing is a disruptive technology in supply chain. Actually, before I go any further, maybe I should just briefly explain what 3D printing is, just in case there's anybody listening in who's not au fait with it. 3D printing, otherwise known as additive manufacturing, is where you create products through printing in thousands upon thousands of thin layers, using materials as diverse as powders, metal, plastic, carbon, resins, even flesh. You can print human organs now. This piece arose from a conversation I had with a noted supply chain lawyer and author called Dennis Unkovich, who's recently published a book called Transforming the Supply Chain. And in it, he dedicates a chapter to 3D printing and takes the reader through all the reasons why 3D printing is going to be such a big deal in supply chain in the years to come. Now, the thing about 3D printing and why it's going to be so disruptive is that all of its strengths play to all of supply chain's needs. So there's a need in supply chain to shorten the supply chain at the moment, to reduce risk. Well, there's no better way of shortening a supply chain than to send a digital file from anywhere to anywhere else that enables you to manufacture 10,000 components, in an industrial unit instead of a manufacturing plant. So not only can it shorten your supply chain, but that is clearly a very sustainable way to work in terms of carbon footprint as well.
It is a very sustainable way to work, and this topic often raises its head. But for instance, we were filming with the Royal Air Force here in the UK a month or so ago, and we were looking at some 3D printing that they were doing for some spare parts for some of their vehicles, not necessarily for the fighter aircraft that were gracing the skies, but for their ground transport. And that's all well and good, and it's great because they were trying to source a part, and it was going to take maybe 6 weeks to arrive, and the cost was quite prohibitive as well. And they came up with their own program, so they did a design of the parts that they needed, and they printed it themselves. What seems to be holding the technology back, as far as I'm aware, is the time that takes, because, as you said, that additive manufacturing, it's multiple thousands of layers upon layers upon layers, and you're just not going to create objects in bulk, are you? Like you mentioned there about manufacturing, like 10,000 components. That's going to require either 10,000 3D printers, or they're going to have to really ramp up their speed of printing. So what's happening there? Do you know? I mean,
it's a young technology, Scott. So you're in the very early stages of it. But if you think that 3D printing really was nowhere 10 years ago, it was mainly used for prototypes, as you say, because it is very slow. So you make one of something, and then you use that to market whatever it is you want to sort of mass produce. But now you're reaching the point where there are machines that can output thousands of objects, nowhere near as quickly as traditional manufacturing methods, but still the speed at which the technology is developing would suggest that in 10 years' time, it will have gone beyond the point where it's gaining traction, and it will become like an entrenched manufacturing method.
Okay, all right. I'd be interested to know what Sheldon thinks about that as well later on. Maybe that's something we can ask him when he's on the call. Okay, so thanks for that, Sean. We're going to move on now from supply chain to procurement. And Georgia, what story have you got for us?
Yeah, so as many people probably are already aware, there's been a lot of discussion recently around the impact that the Russia invading Ukraine could have on procurement and supply. So thousands of US and European companies in particular rely on their business with Russian and Ukrainian suppliers. So that could put a risk to those partnerships if there is a conflict. So I looked at a recent report with Interos, an operation resilience company, and they outlined sort of 4 major risks that could come to light if there is an invasion. So one in particular was price rises, particularly for the energy industry, raw materials and agricultural markets, where the US and European companies get a lot of that from. Also export restrictions, potential cyber threats, and then geopolitical instability as well.
Yeah, I completely get that. I mean, it's at the time of recording this show, bearing in mind that this is available to watch on demand as well, so if someone's not watching this live, we're still a little bit unsure about what's actually happening on the border there between Russia and Ukraine. I don't want to get into a political discussion, but absolutely, it would have significant impacts on our lives far beyond the walls of supply chain and procurement, for sure. But yeah, in particular, there you mentioned energy, for instance, and obviously the gas pipeline that is going through from Russia through, I think it goes through Germany and several other countries as well. But that's a significant risk if that pipeline doesn't happen, or if that pipeline supply gets turned off. Then yeah, huge impacts on the supply of energy throughout Europe, really. Okay, you've got another story as well for us, I think, Georgia, as well.
Yeah, something else that caught my eye was the rise in employee burnout in procurement recently. So according to SIPS, a professional body for procurement and supply, 79% of UK workers are experiencing some form of burnout at the moment. Now, I mean, these figures will probably vary from country to country, but it's clear that the challenges from, you know, the serious issues over the last few years have started to take their toll on the industry. But SIPS is urging procurement leaders to help reduce that burnout among employees in two particular ways. And one of them is supporting time off and breaks for employees, and encouraging them to be open about their communication when it comes to mental health.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, obviously we're highlighting the impact of employees working in procurement and the work of SIPS here, but it's something that's impacting, you know, every industry and every organization, as we are hopefully recovering from the fallout of the pandemic and the turbulent times that we've experienced. But yeah, that's really interesting. I'll make sure I take a look at that one as well, Georgia. So thank you everyone for the commentary so far. We're going to go to the break now, but stay tuned in, everyone. We'll be right back.
We enable our clients to do more with less resources, less time, less budget. My name is Phil Schoonmaker. I'm the CEO of SupplyLogic, a managed services provider in the print, point of sale, and branded merchandise categories. UMass has several campuses, each with its own brand and personality. We're going to be managing a mutually agreed supplier panel going forward with a heavy focus on local production and sustainability. We're implementing fully integrated technology. It's been a great experience working with such an innovative organization. We're working closely with the Unified Procurement Services team led by Dave Cho, their Chief Procurement Officer. The UPST has been transforming the way the university thinks about procurement by infusing strategy into everything that they do. We're honored to be selected as one of their value-added partners. Anytime an organization transforms the way that it manages a vitally important aspect of their business, the challenge will be the transition from the status quo to the new model. We're implementing a phased approach to ensure business continuity and a smooth transition into the new solution. So it's a win-win for them as well as us and the university.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. And during that ad break, it gave me the opportunity to just look at some of the comments and some of the people that are joining us live today. So I just wanted to say hello to a few people. Kieran, feel free to just select any of these and to put them up on screen. Here we go. Hi, Ahmed. How are you doing today? We've got people coming from all over, as you can see, from New Mexico, Diana from Colombia. We also have people from Pakistan, from London, from Dubai, from Saudi Arabia, from Casablanca, and equally exotic Norwich. So welcome to the show, everyone. Very glad to have you here. We've had some really good comments as well about some of the stories we've been talking about. I'll try and get round to those later if we can, but please bear with us, and we always try and engage with you as much as we can. But now back to the show. And coming up, we'll still have a chance to look at the result of our poll about disruptive tech. And we've also got some highlights from the February issue of Supply Chain Digital and a sneak peek at the March issue of Procurement as well. But first, Sean, you've got a special guest for us.
Yeah, I certainly have, Scott. I'd like to welcome Sheldon Myadat, CEO of Suppico. Now, Suppico's a cloud-based AI-driven platform designed to enhance the customer-supplier relationships. So welcome aboard, Sheldon. Delighted to have you.
Good afternoon, everybody.
And you're wearing glasses as well. It's a royal flush.
Yeah, just reading glasses. Can't see much without them.
Yeah.
Just before we go any further, I have to reveal that Sheldon's first computer was, Sheldon?
A Commodore 64.
Very fancy. A full 64K of memory.
Full 64K, yes.
Right. I know. But going back to your point, Sean, about 3D printing, that just shows how quickly, computers moved and technology moves forward, right? The ZX81 with 1K, the Spectrum with 16,
exactly. Yeah.
Commodore 64. Now look at the kind of processors and everything else we have in our laptops. But anyway, back over to you.
It all tends to go in step changes, doesn't it? But so, I mean, Sheldon, Subeco, your core sort of business is built around relationships, isn't it? Business relationships.
Relationships are the very core of what we do, indeed.
And what I find really fascinating about what you do is that relationships are intangible things, aren't they? And yet technology is very tangible. So how do you knit the two together? I mean, could maybe just give us one example of how you use artificial intelligence to actually cement and augment relationships in a business setting?
So let me give you, indeed, great question. A little bit of a backdrop to that. So relationships are, in our day-to-day, activities. We don't live inside a contract. We live in the day-to-day, where things don't necessarily happen in line with a contract clause or SLAs, etc. Or anything that's drafted into a written contract. And so historically, the kind of relationship element of a contracted service has kind of been deferred. It's been overlooked for the more addressable gains found in the contract itself. The relationship area, when I say intangible, how do you take that operational relationship essence and bottle it into something that's structured, because it is an intangible.
Well, that's what you've done, isn't it? I mean, how have you done that exactly?
So you're trying to take that relationship as it is without putting any substance to it. It's like trying to nail a proverbial jelly to a wall. So you've got to create structure in that space. You've got to take that unstructured data, because bear in mind that it's the unstructured data, the relationship data that we're talking about. The lower down in a system you go, the more systemic you become with the data. The higher
so
up.
Could you maybe give us one example then of how AI is actually improving a relationship, Sheldon? Say, between a supplier and a customer.
Right. So we've got a new module coming out. First of all, we use AI in the back end of the system to actually make everything run very, very fast for a start, because it looks at the different usages and drives resources to the more popular, the high utilized areas. So that's one. In terms of AI in the front end, we use it in a few different ways. So one of our new modules coming out is called Auto Risk, which is autonomous risk management within the relationship space, within that unstructured data space.
I see.
And we use a set of AI algorithms to study all of the data that's amassed, because the platform creates a lot of unstructured data. Unstructured data is typically text, documents, photographic uploads, that kind of. It's non-systemic data. It's unstructured. It's contributed data, and that unstructured data. If you think of data as obviously everybody's, it's a very valuable commodity. But unstructured data is like crude oil. You need to refine it.
Exactly.
Get the value from it.
We were alluding to that earlier on, about meaningful data and how you can just have data bloat very quickly unless you're very careful. So I bet you didn't do all that on a Commodore 64, though, did you, Sean?
No.
But so
No.
I was also, Subeco, you work across so many sectors. I'm just interested to know, does the way your AI engine work, Is it the same like in the beauty sector as, say, defence?
Yes. That's not to say that there aren't differences. There are not industry solutions. So another one of our new modules called Heatmap is a system. It's a reciprocal survey, a series of questions and answers that are related that are out of the box are performance related, so industry agnostic. The result, the survey is taken one side of the fence and then the other side of the fence, and then candidly swapped. It creates some very, very interesting findings when, for example, you've asked or answered a question around flexibility. The word flexibility might pop up on the screen, and the question around the flexibility word will be, does your supplier demonstrate flexibility over contract, for example? That same question is asked in context on both sides of the relationship. The findings are often different, and that is the secret sauce, because if you've got one party saying flexibility is down here, the other saying flexibility up here, what's driving the difference? Why does one party think that and the other party thinks the other? So that leads on to a series of actionable insights and steps to actually to close that gap, if you see what I mean. And we use AI predictive analytics to actually score some of the input that's provided into the survey.
And what about automation? What role does that play?
Automation, we feature quite a lot of automated workflow into the platform as well. One of the things that we've said is that with a platform that creates so much data centrally, it will still rely on users who are time pressured to actually log in and utilize that data. And so rather than wait for that to happen, we've taken a very non-passive approach to the way data is managed. So obviously all the processing is going on within the platform to actually drive and cultivate, and if you like, going through that refining process with the data. But we then score the quality. We have an ongoing quality scoring process for the data, and a data age process. The data ages. Data is most valuable when it's live, so it ages over the course of a rolling month. And we take that data as it's aging, and we push it out to the community. We push it out, push the activity out, so that you don't have to log in and find the data. The data finds you wherever you are in the community. Right. It's another way of ensuring that compliances aren't missed, activities aren't dropped. That it just keeps all the plates spinning in a very distributed environment now, especially with more distributed teams and more remote working.
Yeah, exactly. Well, actually, the mention of remote working, Sheldon, takes me onto my final question, which is the pandemic. I mean, it's been brutal, hasn't it? And it's been protracted as well, and it's changed a lot. And I'm guessing that it's changed business relationships too. What's the biggest change on that front that you've experienced?
Well, I think relationships have come to prominence. Organizations have started to have them. They've seen through the pandemic. Obviously, there have been impacts across businesses across all sectors, and the realization is that in the past there were I would say very poor relationships, with the focus being largely on the numbers. And when business is going through, if there's a downturn in business and you're relying on those numbers, your business is shrinking. It's as simple as that. If you're relying on a 10 to 15% pre-baked profit margin, simply put, as business drops, as business reduces, your margins diminish. You've got to find another way to meet those value targets that are still up there. And so how do you do that? You need to think about having relationships with your suppliers, and the suppliers are really good at having relationships and collaborating. So they do it with many customers. And so that I'd say that one of the biggest impacts from the pandemic in terms of SRM, supplier relationship management, and collaborative engagement supply chain, is that relationships have come to prominence. Companies are seeking to really exploit the value in those unstructured areas, because they house, you've got 25%, upwards of 25% value over term sitting there hemorrhaging through poor relationship-driven value and poor data retention. So that's a big area.
That's absolutely fascinating. I mean, we've all experienced, what the pandemic does to relationships on a personal footing, haven't we? Even though it's sort of driven people apart, it's also brought them closer together in some ways too, hasn't it? Yes. Sheldon, thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on board.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And over to you, Scott.
Okay, yeah, fascinating insights as ever. Thank you, Sheldon. Supply continues to dominate the headlines, as I said at the top of the show, beyond its usual home in the business section. So thanks, Sheldon, for joining us again today. Okay, so now let's turn our attention to our digital magazines. And Sean, why don't you give us a quick highlight, and let's make it a quick one, from the February issue of Supply Chain Digital.
Yes, Scott. So I would like to chat about a feature we ran on inventory management in the retail sector. Now, retail, probably more than any other sector, has undergone just a profound amount of change during the pandemic. You not only had the e-commerce boom during lockdown, but you've also had a shift away from multi-channel to omni-channel. There's a sort of subtle distinction there. Omni-channel is still multi-channel, but it's just a seamless user consumer experience. Now, all of that has meant that retailers can no longer use the past to predict the future. They have to use the present. And what's enabling them to do this is good old technology. And they are harvesting data now at every point of the customer journey. It's real-time data. And this is enabling them to use inventory management as a laser-guided tool to put any product, anywhere at any time in any customer's hands. And in the past, inventory wasn't really like that. So I just thought it's fascinating the way that has changed, one aspect of supply quite profoundly, from being one thing to being another thing entirely.
Yeah, retail's a really interesting sector, isn't it? I mean, there's obviously been some obvious disruption, as people move from bricks and mortar to e-commerce, and it touches on so many of our other titles as well. Actually, it's something that I'm reading about more and more across all of our industry titles. I should say at this stage, actually, if you want to read the latest issue of the magazine, you can do that by visiting our website, which is supplychaindigital.com. And that's where you'll find all the latest news, the analysis, and all of our magazines as well. And if you want to read procurement, you can go to procurementmag.com, and you'll be able to find Procurement Magazine and all of its related stories as well, which brings me rather gratuitously round to Georgia again. And Georgia, why don't you give us a bit of a preview of one of the features that's going to be appearing in the March issue of Procurement?
Yeah, so in our upcoming issue of Procurement Magazine, we have the diversity inclusion feature that Helen mentioned last week. So in the lead up to International Women's Day, we're going to be looking at whether all this sort of talk about diversity inclusion that's been going on over the past few years is actually sort of leading to any meaningful change.
Which is what I'd like to see. I really enjoyed the insight from Molly Dobson, the country manager at Amazon Business UK and Ireland, and she explained how Amazon Business, and of course I am a valid Amazon customer, how Amazon Business is a global procurement solution which helps organizations upgrade their procurement with cost and time savings, increased productivity, and added insight.
Yeah, so we also explore the risk modern procurement teams are facing, and the vital role that technology will play in helping organizations stay safe. We discussed that with Group Customer Relationships Director Duncan Brock from SIPS, and Jim Brewer, CEO of digital procurement software and solution provider Jagger, who's VP of product marketing, Scott Burns, was our guest on last show. So we also have some interesting insights from industry leaders on 2 other important topics relating to spend management and contract lifecycle management.
Okay, so there you go. So if you're interested in procurement, make sure you read the new issue, the March issue of Procurement Magazine. And obviously for all things supply chain, you have Supply Chain Digital as well. Now, while you're checking out those issues on our website, so you can see the URLs just tickering across the bottom there, you may have noticed that the websites have got a fresh new look as well, which make them look even better than they did before, and packed full of content. Every day, new content coming your way. Everything supply chain and everything procurement. Now, I think actually we'll move on right now to find out what our audience has been saying. So, Helen, a little bit of a drum roll. Can you give the, we don't have a drum roll sound actually, Kieran, do we? We'll have to work on that for next time.
Next time.
Could you, could you give us the results of the poll? What have the people said?
So the question was, which techs do you feel are the most disruptive in the supply chain? And I was wrong. It was not drones that came in first place. The people have spoken, and it is AI with 54% of the votes. Internet of Things came in second with 25%, and then drones, and then 3D printing.
Sean, your 3D printing came last.
Well, it's a juvenile technology. I did say that.
So is this a surprise to anybody? I mean, Sean, I think you pretty much called this at the outset, but 54% went for AI. So, tell me about that. Was that a surprise?
Well, it's no big surprise, Scott, really. I mean, you only have to listen to, to industry experts like Sheldon to realize just how powerful AI is. And, it's just all pervasive now. Automation and it's just driving so many digital solutions. I mean, the thing about IoT is it's, that they are things. They're things feeding data. So there's never going to be as influential as processes that actually replace human interactions and improve human interactions. So no big surprise that that's top.
No, of course. And talking of influence and human interactions, it's the perfect segue into reminding you that we have Procurement and Supply Chain Live, our event taking place in London. The Risk and Resilience Conference, as it's called, will be at Tobacco Dock in London on the 27th and 28th of April. And you can join us at the venue or as a virtual attendee as well. Now, in case you missed last year's inaugural event, here's what you missed out on. Good morning and welcome to the first day of the inaugural Procurement and Supply Chain Live.
It's wonderful to be here today just to share a little bit of our journey within Vodafone.
The suppliers were just outstanding. They were rock stars, without a doubt.
Everything can be supplied at very short notice now in all of these regions.
An honor to be a speaker here at the Supply Chain Live conference.
It's been a great audience. It's been some really fantastic speakers.
It's just great to be out and about meeting people face to face.
It's great to see real people in 3D and to be able to have that exchange of ideas.
The interaction, the networking, the relationships you can build has been phenomenal. And through Test and Trace, we can carry on doing more of this.
Before that, we had something which is wonderful, and you must all try it. It's absolutely fantastic, called PowerPoint.
There you go, Ninian Wilson there, the Joker. Now, if you want to interact with real people face to face as well, that those dates again, 27th to the 28th of April. As you can see, there you go, the Risk and Resilience Conference. And also, just to remind you, Sustainability Live, that is taking place next week, next Wednesday and Thursday at Tobacco Dock. There are probably a handful of tickets, maybe, that you can get for that as well. So if you visit our websites, you'll be able to find all the details for that. You can still register now, and that's in person or as a virtual attendee as well. Okay, so sadly, that's all we've got time for today. Thanks for joining us for the Supply Chain Digital Show. Thanks to our special guest, Sheldon Maidat of Sopico, and of course to Sean, Georgia, and Helen for bringing us insights and a bit more background on the features that we've been writing. Behind the scenes, thanks to Kieran and the video team. Got to work on that drum roll. Plus, of course, Kaylee and Catherine from the marketing team. This has been a BizClik Media Group production, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks' time. See you then. Bye, everyone.
Bye.